The fluorescent lights of the Morrison and Associates office building cast their cold, sterile glow across the cramped workspace where Rebecca Thompson sat hunched over her desk at 8:47 p.m. on another endless Tuesday evening. At 28 years old, she had spent the last 3 years of her life trapped in this suffocating maze of corporate mediocrity, watching her dreams slowly suffocate under the weight of endless administrative tasks and a boss who seemed to take genuine pleasure in crushing her spirit. The MBA degree hanging on her apartment wall felt like a cruel joke now, a reminder of the strategic mind that lay dormant beneath layers of filing, scheduling, and coffee-making duties that paid her barely enough to cover her student loans and modest Phoenix apartment. The silence in the office was broken only by the distant hum of the copy machine and the occasional footsteps of late-night security guards making their rounds through the maze of cubicles that housed dozens of equally frustrated professionals who had somehow convinced themselves that this monotonous existence was the price of stability in an uncertain world. Hey there, beautiful souls. It's your friend Tina here, and I need to share something with you today that's going to absolutely transform how you see challenges and setbacks in your own life. You know, sometimes the universe puts us in situations that feel impossible. Situations where everyone around us makes us believe we're not good enough, not smart enough, not worthy enough. But what if I told you that those very moments of humiliation and doubt are actually the universe's way of preparing us for something magnificent? Today, I'm bringing you Rebecca's story, and I promise you, by the end of this journey together, you'll understand why sometimes we need to be knocked down completely before we can rise higher than we ever imagined possible. This isn't just about one woman's career transformation. This is about recognizing your own power when everyone else refuses to see it. So grab your favorite cup of tea, get comfortable, and if this story touches your heart the way it touched mine, please hit that like button and subscribe, because we're building a community of people who refuse to let others define their worth. Trust me, you're going to want to share this with everyone you know. Rebecca stared at the stack of proposals on her desk, each one representing hours of meticulous research and strategic thinking that would never see the light of day beyond David Morrison's dismissive glances. David, the 35-year-old heir to his father's consulting empire, had inherited not just the business, but also his father's outdated belief that success was measured by birthright rather than brilliance. Every morning, Rebecca watched him stride through the office in his expensive suits, barking orders and taking credit for ideas that originated from the very people he treated like furniture. The irony wasn't lost on her that she, with her advanced degree in business strategy and 3 years of practical experience, was earning less than half of what David's college fraternity brothers made in their entry-level positions at other companies, positions they'd secured not through merit, but through connections and privilege. She had overheard David's phone conversations with these friends, their voices dripping with the same entitled arrogance as they discussed weekend plans at exclusive country clubs, while she worked overtime to meet impossible deadlines that they would never have to face in their cushioned corporate positions, where failure was softened by family safety nets and success was celebrated regardless of actual contribution. The Henderson Industries file lay open before her, representing the company's largest client and most complex strategic challenge. For weeks, Rebecca had been developing a comprehensive analysis that could revolutionize their client's operational efficiency and save them millions in unnecessary expenditures. She had worked late into countless nights, researching market trends, analyzing competitor strategies, and developing innovative solutions that could position Henderson Industries as a leader in their sector. The proposal was her masterpiece, a 100-page document that represented everything she had learned in business school, combined with insights that could only come from someone who truly understood the intersection of strategy and implementation. Her fingers traced the charts and graphs that told a story of transformation, each data point carefully selected and analyzed to support recommendations that could reshape an entire industry approach to supply chain management and customer retention strategies. But as she prepared to present her findings to David the following morning, Rebecca felt the familiar knot of anxiety forming in her stomach. 3 years of working under his leadership had taught her to expect nothing but condescension. and dismissal, regardless of the quality of her work. She remembered the last time she had presented a strategic recommendation, how David had barely glanced at her research before declaring it overly complicated and unrealistic, choosing instead to implement a generic solution that had ultimately cost their client both time and money. The pattern was always the same. Rebecca would identify problems and develop solutions. David would dismiss her contributions. And then weeks later, he would present similar ideas as his own innovations during client meetings. The memory of watching him take credit for her market analysis during the Carlson Industries presentation still made her jaw clench with frustration, especially when he had received a bonus for the breakthrough thinking that had originated entirely from her late-night research sessions and creative problem-solving abilities. As the cleaning crew began their nightly rounds, Rebecca finally gathered her materials and headed toward the parking garage, her heels echoing against the empty corridors like a countdown to tomorrow's inevitable disappointment. She thought about her college classmates, many of whom were now leading teams, launching startups, or climbing corporate ladders at companies that actually valued innovation and fresh thinking. Meanwhile, she remained trapped in a role that utilized perhaps 10% of her actual capabilities, working for a man who seemed threatened by her potential rather than inspired to nurture it. The weight of her unrealized potential felt heavier with each passing day, and she wondered how much longer she could endure the slow suffocation of her professional dreams before something inside her simply gave up entirely. The parking garage felt like a tomb for abandoned ambitions, filled with the cars of other professionals who had perhaps once harbored similar dreams of making meaningful contributions to their fields, dreams that had been gradually eroded by corporate hierarchies that rewarded compliance over creativity and punished those who dared to challenge the established order of mediocrity. The next morning arrived with the kind of crisp November clarity that made Phoenix's desert landscapes sparkle under the early sun. But Rebecca felt none of its warmth as she sat in the conference room waiting for David to review her Henderson Industries proposal. She had arrived early, arranging her materials with the precision of someone who knew that every detail would be scrutinized for flaws rather than appreciated for excellence. The proposal represented months of careful analysis, late-night research sessions, and innovative thinking that could transform Henderson Industries from a struggling manufacturing company into a streamlined, profitable operation positioned for long-term success in an increasingly competitive market. David Morrison entered the room with his characteristic swagger, his Armani suit perfectly pressed and his coffee cup bearing the logo of the exclusive country club where he spent more time networking than actually working. He glanced at Rebecca's presentation materials with the same expression he might reserve for reviewing his lunch menu, an air of casual indifference that immediately signaled his lack of respect for both her time and expertise. Rebecca took a deep breath and began her presentation, walking him through her comprehensive analysis of Henderson Industries' operational inefficiencies, market positioning challenges, and the strategic recommendations that could save them nearly $2 million annually while positioning them for aggressive growth in emerging markets. For 20 minutes, Rebecca presented her findings with the passion and expertise of someone who truly understood the intricacies of business strategy. She explained how Henderson Industries was hemorrhaging money through outdated supply chain management, how their marketing approach was failing to reach key demographic segments, and how a restructured operational framework could increase their profit margins by 35% within the first year of implementation. Her analysis was thorough, her recommendations were practical, and her projections were based on solid market research and industry best practices that she had studied extensively during her MBA program and refined through her professional experience. David listened with increasing impatience, occasionally checking his phone or glancing at his watch as if Rebecca's detailed strategic analysis was somehow inconveniencing his busy schedule of golf meetings and client lunches. When she finished her presentation and looked at him expectantly, hoping for some acknowledgement of the quality and potential impact of her work, David leaned back in his leather chair and let out a dismissive laugh that sent chills down Rebecca's spine. Rebecca, Rebecca, Rebecca. he said, shaking his head with the condescending tone he typically reserved for explaining basic concepts to interns. You've really outdone yourself this time with all these fancy charts and complicated theories. This is business strategy, David, not rocket science, Rebecca replied, trying to maintain her professional composure despite the growing frustration in her voice. Henderson Industries is bleeding money, and these recommendations could transform their entire operation. The research supports every single recommendation, and the projected returns are conservative estimates based on similar implementations across the industry. She gestured toward her carefully prepared materials, each page representing hours of meticulous work and genuine concern for their client's success. David stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the Phoenix skyline as if contemplating some profound business wisdom, though Rebecca suspected he was simply trying to appear more important than he actually was. The thing is, Rebecca, he said without turning, clients like Henderson Industries don't want complicated solutions from— He paused, turning to face her with a smirk that made her blood run cold. From someone like you. They want proven strategies from experienced professionals, not experimental theories from an administrative assistant who thinks having an MBA makes her qualified to run major consulting projects. The words hit Rebecca like a physical blow, but David wasn't finished. He approached her desk, leaning forward with the kind of aggressive posture that was designed to intimidate and diminish. Let me explain something to you about how the real world works, he continued, his voice dripping with condescension. You're nothing without this job. Without me giving you the opportunity to sit in this office and pretend to be important, you'd be filing papers somewhere for minimum wage. You don't have the connections, the experience, or frankly, the natural business instincts that clients expect from Morrison and Associates. So why don't you stick to what you do best, which is making sure my calendar is organized and my coffee is hot, and leave the real strategic thinking to the people who actually know what they're doing. You know, my dear friends, there are moments in our lives when the universe tests everything we believe about ourselves, and this was Rebecca's moment. I want you to pause here and think about your own life, about those times when someone made you feel small, made you question your worth, made you wonder if you were fooling yourself about your own capabilities. If you're watching this and nodding along, knowing exactly how that feels, please know that you're not alone in this journey. Hit that subscribe button because we're building a family here, a community of people who refuse to let others dim their light. And I promise you, Rebecca's story is about to show you exactly how to turn that pain into power. Drop a comment and tell me about a time someone underestimated you, because your story matters too. And together, we're going to prove that our worth isn't determined by other people's limited vision of who we can become. The silence that followed David's devastating words seemed to stretch into eternity, filling the conference room with a tension so thick that Rebecca felt as if she could barely breathe. She stared at her carefully prepared presentation materials, each page now feeling like evidence of her own foolishness rather than proof of her professional competence. The numbers and charts that had seemed so powerful just moments before now appeared to mock her ambition, and she felt the familiar sting of tears threatening to betray her composure in front of the man who had just systematically dismantled 3 years of professional growth and personal sacrifice. But as David returned to his chair with the satisfied expression of someone who believed he had successfully put an underling back in her place, something extraordinary began to happen. Inside Rebecca's mind and heart, the humiliation that should have crushed her spirit instead began to crystallize into something much more powerful and dangerous to David's comfortable world of inherited privilege and unearned authority. She felt a fire igniting in her chest, not the destructive flame of anger, but the transformative heat of absolute clarity about her own worth and capabilities. Every late night spent researching market trends, every weekend sacrificed to develop innovative solutions, every moment of self-doubt she had endured while watching less qualified people advance past her. All of these experiences suddenly aligned into a singular moment of unshakable determination. Rebecca looked up at David with eyes that no longer held the uncertainty and deference he had grown accustomed to seeing from his employees. "You know what, David?" she said, her voice steady and clear despite the emotional earthquake occurring within her heart. You're absolutely right about one thing. I am nothing without this job, without your permission to exist in your professional space, without your approval to contribute to projects that could actually make a difference in people's lives. But the beautiful thing about being nothing is that you have absolutely nothing left to lose. She began gathering her presentation materials with deliberate precision, each movement calculated to demonstrate the same strategic thinking that David had just dismissed as worthless. You see, while you were inherited this business and coasted on your father's reputation, I was earning my MBA while working 2 jobs to pay for it. While you were networking at country club events and taking credit for other people's ideas, I was studying market dynamics and learning how to identify opportunities that others miss. While you were assuming that my value to this company was limited to administrative tasks, I was developing the kind of strategic insights that companies like Henderson Industries actually need to survive in today's competitive landscape. David's confident smirk began to falter as he recognized something dangerous in Rebecca's tone, something that suggested the comfortable power dynamic he had taken for granted was about to shift in ways he couldn't control or predict. "Rebecca, I think you're overreacting to some constructive feedback," he said, attempting to regain his authoritative composure. "Maybe we can discuss a small raise or some additional responsibilities if you're feeling undervalued in your current role." Rebecca laughed, but it wasn't the bitter sound of defeat that David might have expected. Instead, it was the genuine laughter of someone who had suddenly seen through an illusion that had been limiting her potential for far too long. "David, you still don't understand, do you? This isn't about money or titles or additional responsibilities within your narrow vision of what I'm capable of achieving. This is about recognizing that my strategic analysis of Henderson Industries isn't just some academic exercise or ambitious daydreaming from an overqualified assistant. It's a comprehensive solution to real business problems that could save them millions of dollars and position them for long-term success in their industry." She stood up, her presentation materials organized and ready to leave with her. "So here's what's going to happen. I'm going to take this proposal directly to Jennifer Henderson, because unlike you, she's built her company from the ground up and recognizes strategic value when she sees it. She understands that good ideas can come from anyone, regardless of their current job title or their position in someone else's organizational hierarchy. And when she implements these recommendations and saves her company the money I've projected, she's going to ask herself why Morrison & Associates never presented these solutions to her, despite having access to this level of strategic thinking for the past 3 years. David's face had gone pale as the implications of Rebecca's words began to sink in. Henderson Industries represented nearly 30% of Morrison & Associates' annual revenue, and the thought of losing that client because of his own arrogance and short-sightedness was clearly causing him considerable anxiety. "Rebecca, you can't contact our clients directly without authorization," he said, his voice taking on a desperate edge that revealed just how much power he had actually been wielding over her career and ambitions. "That would be grounds for immediate termination, and I can make sure you never work in consulting again." Rebecca paused at the conference room door, turning back to face David with a smile that held no trace of the uncertainty or deference he had grown accustomed to seeing from her. "David, you're still thinking about this all wrong. You're assuming I need your permission to contact a CEO who might be interested in strategic solutions that could transform her business. You're assuming I'm afraid of being terminated from a job that has consistently underutilized my skills and undervalued my contributions. But most importantly, you're assuming that your threats have more power than my confidence in the quality of my work and the value of my ideas." She opened the door, then paused one more time to deliver words that would haunt David's comfortable assumptions for months to come. "The funny thing about being nothing, David, is that it means you have everything to gain and nothing left to fear. And that, my former boss, is a very dangerous combination for people who have been taking advantage of others' self-doubt and professional insecurity." The elevator ride down to the parking garage felt like a descent into a completely different version of herself, each floor marking Rebecca's transition from dutiful employee to strategic entrepreneur, willing to bet everything on her own capabilities and vision. Her hands trembled. slightly as she clutched her presentation materials, not from fear, but from the adrenaline rush of finally taking control of her professional destiny after 3 years of allowing someone else's limited vision to define her potential. The underground garage felt like a cocoon of possibility as she sat in her modest Honda Civic, staring at the Henderson Industries contact information she had researched months earlier but never dared to use without David's permission. Jennifer Henderson's direct office number seemed to pulse with opportunity on Rebecca's phone screen as she contemplated the magnitude of what she was about to attempt. Bypassing Morrison & Associates to contact their largest client directly wasn't just a career risk. It was a complete rejection of the traditional corporate hierarchy that had kept Rebecca trapped in administrative purgatory despite her advanced qualifications and innovative thinking. But as she remembered David's dismissive laughter and his cruel assessment of her professional worth, Rebecca felt that same transformative fire igniting in her chest, reminding her that sometimes the greatest opportunities emerge from moments when you have absolutely nothing left to lose. She dialed the number before her rational mind could catalog all the ways this bold move could backfire and destroy what remained of her consulting career in Phoenix. Henderson Industries, Jennifer Henderson's office. This is Maria speaking, came the professional voice. On the other end of the line, Rebecca took a deep breath and launched into the most important sales pitch of her life, explaining that she was Rebecca Thompson from Morrison & Associates with critical strategic recommendations that could save Henderson Industries millions of dollars annually while positioning them for aggressive growth in emerging markets. To Rebecca's amazement, Jennifer Henderson agreed to see her that very afternoon, intrigued by someone confident enough to bypass traditional consulting protocols to present what sounded like genuinely innovative solutions to problems that had been plaguing her company for months. The 3 hours between that phone call and the meeting passed in a blur of preparation, rehearsal, and the kind of nervous energy that comes from knowing you're about to discover whether your self-assessment of your own capabilities matches reality or represents nothing more than ambitious self-delusion. Jennifer Henderson's corner office overlooked the bustling Phoenix business district from the 23rd floor of a gleaming corporate tower that seemed to symbolize everything Rebecca aspired to achieve in her professional life. At 45, Jennifer had built Henderson Industries from a small family manufacturing business into a regional powerhouse, but recent market pressures and operational challenges had been threatening the company's long-term viability. She was exactly the kind of leader Rebecca had always hoped to work with. Someone who valued results over politics and innovation over tradition. Ms. Thompson, I have to admit I'm curious about why someone from Morrison & Associates felt compelled to contact me directly rather than working through the usual consulting channels, Jennifer said, as she gestured for Rebecca to take a seat across from her expansive mahogany desk. David Morrison and I have worked together for several years, and this is definitely not his typical approach to client relations. Rebecca felt her heart racing as she realized this was the moment that would determine whether her career would be defined by David's limited vision of her potential or by her own willingness to bet everything on her strategic capabilities. Ms. Henderson, I need to be completely honest with you about why I'm here and why I felt it was necessary to reach out to you directly, she began, her voice steady despite the magnitude of what she was risking. I've been developing strategic recommendations for your company for the past several months, but those recommendations have been consistently dismissed by Morrison & Associates leadership as too complex or ambitious for implementation. She opened her presentation materials with the confidence of someone who had finally decided to trust her own expertise rather than seeking validation from people who were threatened by her potential. What I'm about to show you represents a comprehensive analysis of Henderson Industries' operational inefficiencies, market positioning challenges, and growth opportunities that could transform your company's financial performance within the first year of implementation. These aren't theoretical academic exercises. They're practical solutions based on extensive research, industry analysis, and strategic thinking that could save your company approximately $1.8 million annually while increasing your market share in key demographic segments. Jennifer leaned forward with genuine interest as Rebecca began, presenting the same strategic analysis that David had dismissed just hours earlier. But unlike David's condescending indifference, Jennifer asked probing questions that demonstrated both her business acumen and her appreciation for the depth and quality of Rebecca's research. She wanted to understand the methodology behind Rebecca's projections, the timeline for implementation, and the specific metrics that would measure success or failure of the proposed strategies. For the next 90 minutes, Rebecca experienced what it felt like to have her ideas taken seriously by someone who recognized strategic value when she encountered it. Jennifer didn't just listen politely to Rebecca's presentation. She challenged assumptions, explored alternatives, and demonstrated the kind of intellectual engagement that Rebecca had been craving throughout her 3 years at Morrison & Associates. This was what real strategic consulting was supposed to feel like, a collaborative exploration of possibilities between professionals who respected each other's expertise and shared a commitment to achieving measurable results. When Rebecca finished her presentation, Jennifer sat back in her chair with the expression of someone who had just discovered a solution to problems that had been keeping her awake at night for months. "Rebecca, I have to tell you that this is exactly the kind of innovative thinking Henderson Industries needs right now," she said, her voice carrying the authority of someone who had built a successful business by recognizing opportunity when it presented itself. "Your analysis identifies problems that Morrison & Associates has never even mentioned to me, and your proposed solutions are both practical and ambitious enough to actually make a difference in our operational efficiency and market positioning." The words that Jennifer Henderson spoke next would forever change the trajectory of Rebecca's professional life and personal understanding of her own capabilities. "Rebecca, I'm going to offer you a position as Senior Strategic Consultant with Henderson Industries, starting at $75,000 annually with performance bonuses based on the successful implementation of your recommendations," Jennifer said, her tone carrying the decisive authority of someone who had built her business empire by making quick decisions about talent and opportunity. "I've been looking for someone with exactly your combination of analytical skills and innovative thinking. And frankly, I'm surprised that Morrison & Associates has been using you for administrative tasks when you clearly possess the strategic capabilities that could transform any organization fortunate enough to recognize your potential." Rebecca felt the world tilting around her as the reality of Jennifer's offer began to sink in, representing not just a dramatic salary increase, but validation of everything she had believed about her own professional worth during those long nights of self-doubt and frustrated ambition. $75,000 was more than double her current salary at Morrison & Associates, but more importantly, it represented an opportunity to finally use her advanced education and strategic thinking capabilities in ways that could create measurable impact for a company that valued innovation over hierarchy and results over politics. "Ms. Henderson, I need to ask you something directly," Rebecca said, her voice carrying a mix of gratitude and lingering disbelief at the sudden transformation of her professional circumstances. "Are you offering me this position because you genuinely believe in the quality of my strategic analysis, or because you're trying to send some kind of message to Morrison & Associates about their client service approach?" She needed to know that this opportunity was based on her merit rather than on Jennifer's potential frustration with David's consulting firm. Jennifer smiled with the kind of authenticity that comes from someone who had navigated enough business challenges to recognize genuine talent when it presented itself. "Rebecca, let me be absolutely clear about something. I built Henderson Industries by making smart decisions about people, strategies, and opportunities. I don't offer senior consulting positions to make points about client service, and I certainly don't invest $75,000 annually in someone unless I'm convinced they can deliver results that justify that investment. Your strategic analysis demonstrates exactly the kind of thinking that Henderson Industries needs to navigate the challenges we're facing in today's competitive market environment." The drive back to Morrison & Associates felt like a victory lap through the streets of Phoenix, with Rebecca's resignation letter already composed in her mind as she contemplated the sweet satisfaction of delivering news that would shatter David's comfortable assumptions about power dynamics and professional hierarchies. She had spent 3 years accepting his assessment of her limited value and potential, but Jennifer Henderson's offer had just provided irrefutable proof that David's opinions reflected his own insecurities rather than any objective evaluation of Rebecca's capabilities or professional worth. David was in his office reviewing quarterly reports when Rebecca knocked on his door, her resignation letter sealed in an envelope that represented 3 years of accumulated frustration finally transformed into decisive action. "David, I have something I need to discuss with you," she said, her voice carrying a confidence that immediately caught his attention and triggered his instinctive defensiveness about maintaining control over his employees' career trajectories and professional ambitions. "If this is about our conversation earlier, Rebecca, I think you'll find that a good night's sleep will help you put things in proper perspective," David said without looking up from his reports, apparently assuming that his morning humiliation tactics had successfully reinforced the power dynamic he considered essential to maintaining order in his inherited business empire. "Sometimes we all need reminders about our roles and responsibilities within the organization." Rebecca placed her resignation letter on David's desk with the same deliberate precision she had used to organize her presentation materials that morning, each movement calculated to demonstrate the strategic thinking that he had dismissed as worthless just hours earlier. "David, I'm resigning from Morrison & Associates effective immediately," she said, her words carrying the finality of someone who had finally chosen to trust her own assessment of her professional value rather than accepting his limitations as definitive truth about her potential. David looked up from his quarterly reports with the expression of someone who had just been told that the fundamental rules of his professional universe were no longer applicable to his business relationships and employee management strategies. "Rebecca, you can't resign without proper notice, and frankly, I don't think you've thought this decision through carefully," he said, his voice taking on the patronizing tone he typically used when employees dared to challenge his authority or question his management decisions. "My beautiful community, we've reached that pivotal moment in Rebecca's journey where everything she had endured, every night of self-doubt, every moment of feeling undervalued, suddenly transforms into the foundation for something magnificent. I want you to pause here and think about your own moments of transformation. Those times when you finally decided to bet on yourself instead of waiting for others to recognize your worth. This is why I love sharing these stories with you, because they remind us that our value isn't determined by other people's limited vision of who we can become. If Rebecca's courage is inspiring you the way it's inspiring me, please hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell because we're building something special here together. And I want to hear from you in the comments. Tell me about a time when you took a leap of faith in yourself, when you decided that your dreams were worth more than other people's doubts. Your stories matter, your journey matters, and together we're proving that sometimes the most beautiful chapters of our lives begin when we finally stop asking for permission to shine. Actually, David, I've thought this decision through more carefully than anything I've ever done in my professional life, Rebecca replied, her voice carrying the calm authority of someone who had finally aligned her actions with her deepest understanding of her own capabilities and worth. "And you're right that I can't resign without proper notice under normal circumstances. But these circumstances are far from normal, considering that you've made it clear that my strategic capabilities have no value within Morrison & Associates' organizational structure and client service philosophy." She gestured toward the resignation letter that lay unopened on his desk, like a small explosive device waiting to detonate his comfortable assumptions about employee loyalty and professional hierarchies. "I've accepted a position as senior strategic consultant with Henderson Industries, starting Monday morning at a salary that reflects the actual market value of my education, experience, and innovative thinking capabilities. Jennifer Henderson recognized the strategic value that you dismissed this morning, and she's offered me the opportunity to implement the recommendations that could save her company nearly $2 million annually." The color drained from David's face as the implications of Rebecca's announcement began to register in his mind like a series of interconnected business disasters threatening everything he had taken for granted about his inherited consulting empire. Henderson Industries represented 30% of Morrison & Associates' annual revenue, and the thought of losing that client relationship because of his own arrogance and short-sightedness was clearly causing him to experience the kind of professional panic that comes from realizing you've systematically underestimated someone whose departure could threaten your entire business model. Rebecca, wait. I think there's been some miscommunication about your role here, and the value that Morrison & Associates places on your contributions to our consulting projects, David said, his voice taking on the desperate tone of someone who was suddenly confronting the financial consequences of his condescending management style and systematic undervaluation of talented employees. Perhaps we should discuss a promotion to senior analyst with a significant salary increase and expanded responsibilities that better reflect your educational background and strategic thinking capabilities. Rebecca looked at David with the kind of patient understanding that comes from someone who had finally seen through the illusions that had been limiting her potential for far too long. David, 6 months ago, that offer would have felt like a validation of everything I had been working toward at Morrison & Associates, she said, her tone carrying neither bitterness nor satisfaction, but simply the clarity of someone who had outgrown the need for his approval or recognition. But what you're offering now isn't based on a genuine recognition of my capabilities or a sincere desire to utilize my strategic expertise effectively. You're making this offer because you're afraid of losing Henderson Industries as a client, not because you've suddenly developed respect for my professional judgment or innovative thinking. She moved toward the door, then paused to deliver words that would haunt David's comfortable assumptions about talent management and employee relations for months to come. The thing is, David, when someone spends 3 years proving their value and receiving nothing but dismissive condescension in return, they eventually realize that the problem isn't their capabilities or their worth as a professional. The problem is working for someone who feels threatened by excellence rather than inspired to cultivate it in others. David stood up from his desk with the frantic energy of someone who was watching his business empire crumble because of decisions that had seemed so reasonable just hours earlier. Rebecca, you can't take our client's strategies and intellectual property to a competitor, he said, his voice carrying the desperate authority of someone who was grasping at legal technicalities to prevent the natural consequences of his own poor judgment and systematic mistreatment of talented employees. Rebecca laughed with genuine amusement at David's sudden concern about intellectual property and client strategies, considering that he had dismissed her Henderson Industries analysis as worthless theoretical speculation just that morning. David, you can't claim intellectual property rights to strategic recommendations that you rejected as overly complicated and unrealistic, she replied, her voice carrying the confidence of someone who had finally learned to trust her own professional judgment over his limited vision of what constituted valuable consulting work. Besides, she continued, Jennifer Henderson specifically told me that Morrison & Associates has never presented any strategic analysis comparable to what I showed her today. So apparently, whatever intellectual property you think you're protecting has never actually been shared with your clients, which makes it difficult to argue that my strategic insights represent some kind of proprietary business advantage that belongs to your consulting firm rather than to the person who actually developed those insights through months of research and analysis. The next 6 months passed in a blur of professional transformation that exceeded even Rebecca's most optimistic projections about her potential impact at Henderson Industries. Under Jennifer Henderson's mentorship and with the full support of a leadership team that valued innovation over hierarchy, Rebecca implemented the strategic recommendations that she had developed during her final months at Morrison & Associates. The results were even more impressive than her conservative projections had suggested, with Henderson Industries saving $1.8 million in the first year, while simultaneously increasing their market share in key demographic segments and positioning themselves for aggressive expansion into emerging markets. Rebecca's success at Henderson Industries became legendary within Phoenix's business community, with other companies beginning to inquire about her availability for strategic consulting projects, and several headhunters reaching out about executive positions that would have been unimaginable just months earlier. But more importantly than the external recognition was Rebecca's internal transformation. The way she had finally learned to trust her own professional judgment and recognize her strategic capabilities as valuable assets rather than ambitious daydreams that needed validation from people who felt threatened by her potential. 6 months after Rebecca's dramatic departure from Morrison & Associates, David Morrison found himself sitting in the awed reception area of Henderson Industries' corporate headquarters, waiting for a meeting that represented everything he had lost through his systematic undervaluation of the talent that had been working under his leadership for 3 years. The irony wasn't lost on him that he was now requesting an audience with the woman he had dismissed as an overqualified administrative assistant, seeking her help to save the consulting business that his arrogance and short-sightedness had brought to the brink of financial disaster. His hands trembled slightly as he clutched the desperate proposal he had spent sleepless nights crafting, knowing that his father's legacy hung in the balance of this humiliating encounter with the woman whose potential he had so catastrophically misjudged. Morrison & Associates had lost 3 major clients in the months following Rebecca's departure, with each company citing concerns about the firm's strategic analysis capabilities and innovative thinking limitations. The Henderson Industries account, which had represented 30% of their annual revenue, had been officially terminated when Jennifer Henderson decided that Rebecca's in-house consulting expertise made Morrison & Associates' traditional approach obsolete and unnecessarily expensive. David's comfortable inheritance was rapidly becoming a struggling business venture that required actual strategic thinking and client relationship management skills that he had never bothered to develop. The sleek reception area around him buzzed with the energy of a thriving enterprise, while his own offices had grown increasingly quiet as former clients chose competitors who could deliver the innovative solutions that Rebecca had tried to implement under his dismissive leadership. Rebecca emerged from the executive elevator wearing a tailored business suit that reflected her new position as Senior Vice President of Strategic Development, a role that Jennifer Henderson had created specifically to retain her services and expand her influence within the organization. Her corner office overlooked the same Phoenix skyline that David had gazed upon just months earlier while dismissing her strategic capabilities. But now the view belonged to someone who had earned her position through demonstrated results rather than inherited privilege. The confidence in her stride and the respectful nods from passing colleagues painted a stark contrast to the woman who had once pleaded for basic recognition in his conference room. "Hello, David," Rebecca said as she invited him into her spacious office, her tone carrying the professional courtesy of someone who had moved beyond resentment into the kind of confident success that made past humiliations feel like necessary stepping stones rather than permanent wounds. "I understand you wanted to discuss some kind of business partnership between Henderson Industries and Morrison & Associates." Her voice held no trace of vindictiveness, only the measured professionalism of someone who had finally found an environment where her capabilities were properly valued and utilized. David looked around Rebecca's executive office with the expression of someone who was finally confronting the full magnitude of his own professional misjudgment and systematic waste of extraordinary talent. The strategic planning materials on her walls, the industry recognition awards on her desk, and the confident authority in her demeanor all testified to capabilities that he had dismissed as worthless just months earlier when she had been desperately seeking his recognition and professional validation. A framed Forbes article featuring Rebecca's innovative approaches to corporate restructuring served as a painful reminder of the expertise he had relegated to filing and coffee-making duties. "Rebecca, I need to be honest about why I'm here," David began, his voice carrying none of the condescending authority that had characterized their previous professional interactions. "Morrison & Associates is struggling financially, and I've come to realize that your departure cost us much more than just one employee. You took with you the kind of strategic thinking and innovative problem-solving that our clients actually need, and I've been too proud and too stupid to admit that, until now." The words tasted bitter in his mouth, each admission feeling like another nail in the coffin of his professional pride. Rebecca listened with the patient attention of someone who had finally learned to evaluate professional relationships based on mutual respect and shared commitment to excellence rather than hierarchical power dynamics and inherited authority structures. "David, I appreciate your honesty about the challenges facing Morrison and Associates," she replied, her tone reflecting the kind of professional maturity that comes from having one's capabilities properly recognized and utilized by leadership that values innovation over tradition. She gestured toward her wall of achievements, each certificate and award representing opportunities that David had prevented her from pursuing while under his employ. "But I think you're still misunderstanding the fundamental issue that led to my departure from your company," she continued, gesturing toward the strategic planning materials that covered her office walls like testimonies to her professional transformation and achievement. "This isn't just about recognizing my individual capabilities or admitting that you made mistakes in your evaluation of my potential contributions to client projects. This is about creating organizational cultures that identify and cultivate excellence, rather than feeling threatened by employees who possess capabilities that exceed their current job descriptions." Her words carried the wisdom of someone who had transformed professional rejection into extraordinary success through sheer determination and unwavering belief in her own worth. David shifted uncomfortably in his chair as Rebecca's words forced him to confront not just his treatment of one exceptional employee, but his entire approach to talent management and professional development within his inherited business empire. "Rebecca, I'm prepared to offer you a partnership in Morrison & Associates, with full authority over strategic consulting projects and a compensation package that reflects your demonstrated value to client relationships and business development initiatives." His voice cracked slightly as he made the offer that represented everything he should have recognized years earlier. Rebecca smiled with the kind of gracious confidence that comes from having finally aligned her professional circumstances with her actual capabilities and strategic vision. "David, that's a generous offer, and I'm genuinely grateful that you've come to recognize the value of strategic thinking and innovative problem-solving in consulting relationships," she replied, her voice carrying no trace of bitterness or vindictive satisfaction, only the clear-eyed assessment of someone who had learned to make decisions based on strategic merit rather than emotional satisfaction. "However, I've found my home here at Henderson Industries, where my contributions are valued from day one rather than dismissed for years before being reluctantly acknowledged."